Good morning. So today we are in the fourth session, the series of the topic, the book, The Spiritual Individual in Quest of the Living Organization by Sri Garry Jacobs. So the purpose of life is to enjoy that ecstasy. So that's the concept we know. But how is the question? So even though we have problems, how to keep that ecstasy or bliss? That's the question I am asking. So we are always feeling depressed or feeling down when we are facing a problem. But by coming to Mother, we know how to overcome the problems by consecration or by surrendering to Mother. But a non-devotee, as non-devotees, how these people have excelled in their field and achieved that ecstasy, or they have overcome their problems into opportunities. So I would like to hear from Sri Garry Jacobs. I welcome Sri Garry Jacobs.
Good morning. I'd like at the outset to thank a few people who have taken a lot of interest and effort in making the book more accessible to devotees. Saraswati, who used to work with us in Bondi, who's now in the US, has been doing these YouTube summaries. I hope some of you have seen them. It's on KYNet. Her YouTube videos. She's doing chapter by chapter. I think it gives a very good outline. Huh? Then, of course, Sento Murugan did a very extensive 100-page document in English. He knows the book better than I do. I think he's studied it more closely. And now I understand he's done a full summary in Tamil also. Has that been hosted yet on the web? I don't know. And he had help from his sister, Banu Ratna, Reta on that. And now another devotee from New York, Nora McDewitt, who wrote to me about 4 or 5 years ago. She's a playwright, expressing interest in turning the book into a TV series. That's a very great, ambitious idea. And she has now sent me a first rough draft of a pilot for the first episode. And I discussed it with Appa. She's done a very good job for a beginning in a very challenging thing. I meant to suggest to her, if she doesn't mind, because it's only a work in progress, if it's hosted on KYNet, then you have an opportunity not just to see it, but give comments and suggestions on how, because to reach a general reader or viewer is a different medium than writing a novel. And we have to hold their attention and communicate very effectively. So it requires a lot of creative imagination. I have no experience in that area, but it made me think a lot about how it could be done. And maybe some of you have more insight and talent. So if she agrees, we'll post it on KYNet, and anybody who has ideas or suggestions can discuss it, how it could be done in a way that's going to catch the attention first, because TV has to catch the attention and hold it. It can't be too philosophical and too intellectual. We have to, the reason I like it is because the whole theme of the book is the translation of knowledge into power, meaning the application of knowledge. And how I benefited most from Appa, because I was very much attracted to Sri Aurobindo and Mother's writings because they were so wonderful. but he insisted from the very beginning, how is it changing your life? How have you taken the knowledge of what they wrote and translated into practice and seen the results? That is the real measure. Knowledge that is power. And that's really the theme of my novel as well, is knowledge that is power. Power for the positive. Power for the spiritual evolution. And in a medium like TV, it's very difficult to convey abstract ideas. Philosophy has, you can have a mantra, but beyond a mantra or a slogan, it's very difficult. So the whole thing has to be depicted in the story. It has to come out through the action. It has to come out through the characters and the emotions. And so it takes a real insight into how to do that. And from that point of view, I think it'll be very helpful for me and for the project if we can help her do that very well and reach a wider audience in terms they will understand, in life conditions. That's why we took up P&P for study, because it's a life situation. It's a personal situations. It's not we're taking the principles of life divine and translating it and seeing it in a story. So that's I'm going to go back for a few minutes to a review of what we've already discussed, because the more I think about it, the more people are writing to me now. I'm seeing Nora's work and others. The more I think about why the story is written the way it is, the more insight I'm getting. So I wanted to just review it. The story, as you know, starts with the supramental descent on February 29th, 1956. Appa showed me a passage in Sri Aurobindo's essays, Divine and Human, which reminded me very much of that. It's a very powerful passage that Sri Aurobindo wrote. It's a little long, but I'd like to read it out because it really sets the context for the whole book. It really views the book and our lives and their work, not from the point of view with how we as devotees can become more cheerful and more successful, which is valid for us personally, but what they were really trying to do. And more than that, how momentous are the circumstances in which we live today. We're not just lucky to have Mother and Sri Aurobindo or Appa as personal gurus who can give us good advice to solve our problems. That's the smallest part. And the more we understand why they really come and came and what they have really done, the more our problems will simply disappear. They'll dissolve because we understand it in the wider context. And we'll become more and more receptive to really the power they have brought. I think I have mentioned at least once in the last 5 or 6 years, there was a devotee, a sadhak in the ashram who was there when we came to Pandi in '71. He once told somebody about the power of the supramental force. He can get, anytime he goes in line for the breakfast at the ashram dining room, he gets all the bananas he wants. And that proves that the supramental force is very powerful and very real. It sounds very odd and a little humorous, like a Mr. Collins statement, but I'm afraid that there's a truth in it for all of us, that we are thinking of the grace and power of Mother's force and the supramental descent, that we can get all the bananas we want, though we may like different types of fruit and have different things on our preference list. when clearly the world can get more than it ever dreamed of. We, our souls, humanity, the earth, and Sri Aurobindo says if we really knew what was waiting for us, we would drop all our bananas and everything else of concern and every possible source of regret or sadness or disappointment and rush to what's waiting. So this is what he said. The boon that we have asked from the Supreme is the greatest that earth can ask from the highest. It's not just solving our problems or making us more successful. It's not marriage and exams and salaries and success and all. It's the greatest that earth can ask from the highest. That's what they came for, and that's what was answered. That's what has been answered physically on February 29, 1956, which was just, when I wrote the novel was 2007, so it was 51 years after the supramental descent. Now another 12 years has passed. The change that is most difficult to realize, the most exacting in its conditions, it is nothing less than the descent of the supreme truth and power into matter, into the material existence, into the physical existence. This is no longer a spirituality of moksha or a spirituality of mind or a spirituality just to feel good. This is a spiritual descent that has the power to change the physical conditions, not only of our bodies, but of the material existence on earth. It is nothing less than the descent of the supreme truth and power into matter, the supramental established in the material plane and consciousness and the material world, and an integral transformation down to the very principle of matter. So clearly, there's nothing in our existence that's excluded from this. Only a supreme grace can affect this miracle. The ultimate grace, not in the universe, the ultimate grace beyond creation can bring this, and it has come. It hadn't come when he wrote this. It has come, it has answered. Mother has told us. The supreme power has descended into the most material consciousness. And remember, this was written before 1950. I don't recall the date, but it is all, even at that time, it has descended into the most material consciousness, but he said, but it has stood behind the density of the physical veil, demanding before manifestation that its great open workings can begin, that the conditions of the supreme grace shall be there, real and effective. In other words, the final condition for its realization on earth was not yet fulfilled when he wrote this. It has come all the way down, but there are conditions before it can fully physically manifest itself. And the first condition is that the truth shall be accepted within you entirely and without reserve before it can be manifested in the material being and nature. A total surrender, an exclusive self-opening to the divine influence, a constant and integral choice of the truth and rejection of the falsehood. These are the only conditions made. Everything else has been done for us. Everything else has been done for humanity and for earth. We simply have to be true and sincere. But these must be fulfilled entirely, without reserve, without any evasion or pretense, simply and sincerely down to the most physical consciousness and its workings. And after he wrote this, The supramental descent came all the way down in the physical to the material substance, and it's been working there since then. And this story, as our lives and the world, the real world around us, it's not a story. Story is only a symbol, have been working this out. And Appa has been studying very meticulously for the last 60 years this process of, we don't have Mother Ashurbanipal to tell us this happened because of this, but he's been studying and seeing the signs, and we see them everywhere. We saw them very dramatically in 1989, when the Cold War just vanished, but there are many others. And so, in tracing the beginning of the story and the sightings of the book, when I went back to look at what happened in 1956, at that time, I knew it as a child, but I never connected it until I went back to look. The descent was at the end of February, and within 6 months, there was the revolution in Hungary against the Soviet rule, against the communist authoritarianism. It was the first protest for freedom. And that went on in 68 in Prague, and then in 87 and 89 in Russia, and then in Berlin, and then swept away tyranny, a great tyranny from a huge part of the world. So then the book traces these steps from 56, when the book was seen in Budapest, to 64, when it was seen at Berkeley, which was the time of the youth movement began. The student movement began in Berkeley, spread all over the US and all over the world in the next 4 years. By the time I went to Prague in 1968, it was in Prague. It was behind the Iron Curtain, which was still there. It had permeated everywhere, changing the minds of youth. I don't know how many of you are looking at the international news, but the youth today is awaking internationally. I addressed a conference 10 days ago in Europe, and Appa wanted me to say something about solving the problems of the world that's an undeniable truth with power. And I said at that time, we have serious problems in the world. We still have nuclear weapons. We have climate change. We have all types of competition between countries. We have violence and terrorism and everything. And governments seem to be helpless or unwilling to address it. But if the youth of the world today decide that they will not accept this, all those problems will be swept away. No government in the world, even Chinese, no government in the world can stand up against the youth population and say, no, we refuse. If there's any place, maybe it's North Korea, but I doubt even there. No government can withstand the voice of youth if they decide to mobilize, and it's happening. Maybe if some of you know this, she was 15 years, you all know Malala, what she did for education and got the Nobel Prize. She was only 15, I think, when she started. A 15-year-old Swedish girl named Greta Thunberg, last year, I think it's October, she protested in Sweden. She left, she refused to go to school. She went to the parliament and stood outside and said, the government must stop this destruction of the planet. And youth all over Sweden left the schools and went there. And now it's a movement with millions of youth all over the world who simply, I think a few days ago, they did it. They declared, we're not going to school for one day. Imagine if the youth refused to go to school. Then what will the parents who are now, oh, you missed school means you'll get bad marks on your exam. If the students say you forget this nonsense exam, you save our world. You're destroying the planet. vote for the right person, get out there and demand that the government do what we want. Can any government survive if it denies the voice of youth? And we have India as the youngest population in the world, and the youth population is the largest segment of the world. I'm just giving it as if the youth awake to this truth, the world will be as radically changed in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years as it was in 1989 after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The power is there. What we need is the sincerity. The power is already there. It can only be received when we have the truth and sincerity. So the story is showing this process, this slow awakening of humanity. It went from Berkeley to Prague. It went from there to Berlin. It ended the Cold War. And then in 1994, with a great surprise the world had not anticipated, it created something entirely new called the internet. And we didn't understand 25 years ago how significant this would be, that this new system which has become such a part, it's the first global social institution. It's the first time in history that all humanity has been connected. We've always been divided and separated. It's the first time we have access to what everybody is doing in the world, and we can communicate with everybody, and youth all over the world who are doing it most can be linked to each other and find each other all over the world. This was born only after the end of the Cold War. I believe it could not have been done earlier. And that led up to the year 2000, where my story really begins, with the Millennium Celebration, the beginning of a new millennium, 1,000-year period, not only a new century, but a new millennium. And for those of you, I don't know if you were in California at that time, or if you knew the spirit, the enthusiasm, the optimism that was unleashed by the end of the Cold War, and everything that happens to us only happens for one person, for one reason. Not to punish us for our sins or our insincerity or our falsehood, to make us more conscious of what's waiting and what the opportunities are. When we are positively conscious in our aspiration and awakening, it comes positively. When we're forever, any reason we're lost in fear or selfishness or whatever it may be, it comes to us in a way to awaken us. That's all. That's the only reason. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, was the famous statement of Franklin Roosevelt. The only thing that we have to give up is what he's asking us to give up. We can have no problem if we're really sincere and true, down to the physical. There's no problem. Anything comes, it's not a punishment, it's a call. It's a call to us. And humanity, it's not new, but we see the great positive events have often come. That was a question that Senthil Murugan asked me to answer. Why do they say that the dawn, the greatest darkness, the dawn comes after the greatest darkness? I think the dawn comes after the greatest darkness because we tend to remain what we are until the pressure and intensity becomes great. Only then we make the progress we can make. So the greatest darkness is a result of the fact that we cling to the things we should give up. And the moment we give them up, the whole thing is washed away, just like the Cold War was washed away. The Iron Curtain was washed away. So this conference in the year 2000 comes to celebrate the future of humanity. But the people who are celebrating it all over the world don't know about the supramental descent. They don't know that the power that has brought the millennium is the power of truth. Especially in America, we are very enamored of technology. So we thought technology is the answer to all our problems. It's technology that has done all of the good work. So we're worshiping a new God. If it's not the God of money, it's the God of technology, or it's for somebody, it's a temple God. We miss the fact that the real power that's opening for us is the power of truth. And so there was this extraordinary celebration of the power of technology to solve all our problems. And there's still a lot of people in the world, especially in Silicon Valley and Bangalore probably too, who believe that that's the solution to everything. And what happens when we mistake the real truth and we put all our faith in it and we pursue it? We create an illusion. And that illusion bursts, the bubble bursts. And the conference starts at that point, and the debate between Dent and Stern is really the debate between those who feel that science and technology, materialisms, the old materialism, are the answer to all our problems. And Stern is trying to say there's a spirit and a truth and a humanity behind this science and technology, and we should never surrender ourselves to the thing we have created. We have to discover the truths of our own being, the freedom that we really have. So the debate that comes in the millennium is whether we're going to consciously embrace the opportunity that's come, or we're going to make the mistake of running after false gods or worshiping false idols, which the world has been doing and continues to do in its own way. These four characters who came together at that time see the power of the technology, but they have a shared aspiration that this technology, we shouldn't allow it to dominate us. We have to find a way to use this technology for the good of everybody. We have a power, we have a knowledge that's power. We have to find a way to make that power available to everybody. That's what brought them together, and that's why they left their jobs and started the company. And immediately after they made that commitment, the market crashes. The dot-com boom became a dot-com bust. The bubble burst, as they say. And all the technology companies, thousands of them, went out of business, and all the enthusiasm for the internet, at least temporarily, got washed away. And all their life savings was lost. And the question is, why? Because for them, as for us, even when we turn to Mother, even when we turn to the truth, we tend to do it in our own way, in the old way. We don't give up all our beliefs. We don't give up all our confidence in what we know. We don't give up our faith in traditions and society. We do it. We think we're being sincere. We call Mother, but we're really acting mostly still out of our own old personality. And that's the limitation for us. That's what he, in that quote, is asking us to give up. To really be sincere to the truth is to be sincere only to that. So with all their sincerity, and I think I admire the characters in the story, and I think many of you probably do too. So in many cases, I feel they're much more sincere than I am in looking at their problems and trying to learn from them. But when you're not conscious, you make mistakes. When you don't have the full knowledge, you do things in a way that can be very ignorant. And that's why the problems that come to us not to punish us. They come to point out the places where we're relying on the wrong thing. Our faith is misplaced. Our values are misplaced. This is the point we should change. So their initial success led to a collapse. They had an idea of creating a program that could create money for everybody, but they didn't realize, Vinay didn't realize he's reproducing what's already being done, just doing it better. And it's only going to cause more problems of creating more speculative money for rich people. It's not going to distribute the wealth around the world. It was using an old idea to try to do something new. And it didn't work. And it backfired. And the greatest good luck came to them because it backfired. And it happened early, and they discovered it earlier, and they were sincere enough to discover early that there's something wrong with what we're doing. They had the sincerity. Before anybody accused them, they had the sincerity to say, you see, we did something, we created our program, it created a lot of wealth, but the market is crashing, means there must be something. We take consciousness responsibility. They didn't know the concept, but they had the sincerity to say, if our goal is really prosperity for everybody, there's something wrong here. They had that sincerity. They accused themselves. They didn't wait for anybody to accuse them. Just like when Frank Gresham's mother, Lady Arabella, came to Mary and said, well, Mary, my son is determined to marry you, and I can't stop him. I've done everything I could for the sake of my love of my son, but he's determined to marry you, and I hope you realize that it's going to ruin the whole family, and he's going to be the last of the Gresham lords. We'll have to sell all the property because he'll have no income because he doesn't marry a woman with wealth. And therefore, don't you think, if you really love him, that you're doing him a great harm? And Mary had this sincerity, in spite of the fact that she knows that Lady Arabella has a mercenary ulterior motive. Mary had the sincerity to look at it not from her point of view, but from Frank's point of view, and say, yes, if I marry him, he'll be impoverished. And instead of being the first gentleman of the district, he'll be a nobody or a farmer. I cannot allow my love to harm him. And she takes that decision and she writes to him and says, I release you from our engagement. I don't want any harm to come to you. And unknown to her, the very next day, she becomes the heiress to a fabulous wealth. She doesn't even know that possibility is there, that will not only save Frank, but raise the family to a much higher level than it was before, because she had that sincerity. In her story, in Trollope's story, it happens in a day and she discovers it in a few weeks. In my story, it takes a long time for them to find their way. They don't really know where it's not an overnight. Maybe Mary was a devotee because she gets a response the way mothers were devotees did, or maybe she did it in a complete way, and maybe they did it very reluctantly and hesitantly because they knew they were giving up everything and didn't know what the future was, as she did, but she did it as in one stroke. She did it completely and got an instantaneous response. They didn't. So they went through a process. They were ignorant. They didn't know what to do. Nobody had done it. They didn't have any example. They didn't have the knowledge necessary to take the wider view that they aspired to achieve. And the rest of the story shows them making that change and discovering that knowledge through the book that enabled them to do fully all that they dreamed of, or much more than they dreamed of, and achieve not for themselves alone, that was a very small part, but for the whole world. And that's what the story is. And I think for all of us, the process they went through, even if they didn't have all the advantage we have, has a relevance to all of us in progressively discovering this knowledge. For Mary, she could do it in her own life. She did it in a day or in a few weeks to radically change her own life. She didn't change the country. She didn't change the world. She didn't change everybody. But what they do is they change the world. They change the world for everybody. That's what Sri Aurobindo's talking about. That's why the supramental descent has come. So naturally, the knowledge necessary for that and the process is a greater process. And we see that working out. So this is the context for the story.
Sir? There's a question from Ashokan sir in webinar, which
Good.
I'd like read out.
Yes, please do.
Okay, I'll read that out. You say Mother's Grace ended Cold War in '89, but the problem over Kashmir between India and Pakistan still persists, defying Mother's Grace. What is your understanding?
I'm saved by Sri Aurobindo's quotation, because he says, the supreme power has descended, but before its great openings can begin, the conditions of the supreme grace have to be met, real and effective. The first condition is truth. It has to be accepted entirely. Falsehood has to be accepted entirely. So I think the end of the Cold War did not solve all the problems of humanity. It did not, even as we had hoped it would in 1991-92. It did not even eradicate the nuclear weapons. It ended the nuclear confrontation where 80,000 missiles were on alert, in standpoint alert, where they can be fired at any moment. It reduced the 80,000 missiles to 20,000 or 15,000 now. And it took them all off of standby, demobilized them. It made possible positive relations, which became very positive in the 90s and more in early 2000, and now have gone back in the other direction. So the change has been, for those people, I work with many people who lived behind the Iron Curtain and grew up behind the Iron Curtain, and for them, life is a revolutionary, radical change. But it doesn't mean all the problems of humanity have been solved. So it's not just for Kashmir, it's for the world. Each progress comes in the measure of we accept the truth and we have the sincerity for it. And it just means that there's much more that has to be done. We have climate problems, which are really serious problems. We have water problems and air problems in India, which are real serious problems. How many people are dedicating their lives, even in our own consciousness, to aspire for those problems to be solved? So this is not the end. 56 and 89 or 92 or 94 or 2000 are not the end. It's a process, as it was in the story and is in the story. And the story is there, as Life Divine is there, to give us the knowledge we need to participate positively in that process, first in our own lives. But long after we've solved all our problems, the work is not over. Mother and Sri Aurobindo didn't have any problems. I can say Appa doesn't have problems. The problems are there if only when we want to do it for all. We have how many devotees are there? And most devotees have seen how their own problems vanish. Because our aspiration was to solve our own problem. And that's fine. And that's how Appa has explained that Mother's force can do that. But it's very important to understand, that's not why they came. That's not why they did this supramental yoga. That's not why they brought down the supramental consciousness into the physical. Mother says it was an agonizing physical thing she wouldn't wish on anybody. She's the pioneer, the first person in a physical body to do it. She brought it down so that the life on earth in its greatest depths can be rid of falsehood, pain, suffering, evil. And obviously, we're not there yet. And that's, until that happens, their work continues. Whether we're satisfied with what we have and feel, okay, let the rest of my life be smooth, I'm quite content. Their work is only still beginning until it reaches everybody, until it reaches all humanity, until not only disease is conquered and falsehood is conquered, until death itself is conquered. They're not going in for any minor improvements. They're not settling for anything less. They say the work is not over as long as these things preside on earth. And that's what they've come. And the power that's benefiting us in our lives when we call is a power not for bananas at breakfast, but it's to transform the world and create a different future for not just humanity, but for all life in the world. So we reach the point of despair, the darkest hour before the dawn, when it looks like they have given up everything. They tried to create a program. They were really successful, but only successful in causing more problems rather than solving all the problems. And they had the sincerity to give up everything. And that's the point at which, like Mary Thorne, they really consciously gave up everything they had because they felt that it was to compromise their higher values. Anita? Loud, or give a mic.
My thing is, the common thought with all the four characters in the Beagle is the mutual trust they have on each other, sir. Irrespective of the trouble they are facing outside, if this pattern is there in life as well as in the business partners, then however the bad or good the other person is, will it not wipe away all the obstacles or anything that misfortune that comes up in their life or career?
In fact, this is a main theme of the book, and it's a process. The conclusion you've come to is something they learned. They didn't know at the beginning. They thought their strength was their technical expertise. They were all experts in their professions. They had the knowledge. They thought this technical knowledge, this social knowledge, and this was their strength. They had strength because they had earned a lot of money in the IT industry, and they thought that was a strength for them. They found out all of that got washed away, and they thought they were left with nothing. And Dan felt so sorry about it that he at least thought to himself, if we don't get this new contract with NASA, he'll have to encourage his partners to give up and go back to their jobs because they have families to take care of. They have other obligations. He's the only one who feels, I'm not going to quit. But he's in despair that he doesn't see any hope for them. So the point you made, Anita, is the point that they discover. And it's very important for me because, and let me just illustrate it in a very extreme way. Supposing we want to create prosperity for everybody in the world. for everybody in the world, so that nobody has less than they need, and everybody, at least, it's not supermental transformation, but it's certainly a big progress from where we are. And the larger, today, we don't have to go all over the world. Even today, India has the largest number of poor people in the world, the largest number of starving children, the higher number of infant mortality. We don't have to save the whole world, even to do it in India. And if we fully realize what you said just now, and fully understand the value of trust, that can be wiped out in no time. Because the money is simply an instrument of trust. In the family, when especially, I mean a loving family, a committed family, an unselfish family, a cultured family, you don't need money for a transaction. The family commits to taking care of everybody, not according to their desert, but what they need. And the family is the core, it's the strength of Indian civilization and culture. That commitment to people in the family, simply because they're family, whether they're bright or not bright, whether they're hardworking or not, whether they're good or not, we have a responsibility to them. We don't ask, the mother doesn't ask for cash when she serves breakfast or does the laundry, hopefully. Because it's trust and human relationship that makes the family the great institution that it is. Society is only a bigger family. If today we had the same attitude towards everybody that we have towards the people who are of our flesh and blood, we would have the wealth, we would create that wealth for the whole country or for the whole world. I'm not going to go into it. It's not just a technical way. It's true. We can create, that's what APA is working for. We can create enough money for everybody in the world to have it if we had this one thing, which only shows there are no external problems. There are no physical problems. Our problems are not physical. Our problems are only problems of consciousness. Our problems are only raising our consciousness and having the values and attitudes that we call spiritual. And as those go, the society will progress. So you have really come to the core issue and explain what's going to happen in the story. They don't know it at that time. I have to confess, I'm not sure that when I wrote the story that I knew it. In going back over the story, it's very clear to me why this happened. And that's important for me because I didn't learn this when I was growing up. We grew up in an individualistic society where we're taught that each person should take care of themselves. Not each person should feel consciousness responsibility for everybody else. And the more I have learned from Appa, the more I have discovered what you said, as they are discovering it in the story. So whether I wrote it, I'm not sure. I don't think I wrote it consciously, but I feel it's absolutely true. And the story had to happen. They had to, I don't even know why they lost everything at that time. Now I understand why they lost everything. They had to lose everything. Because like me, when I came here, my faith was in the wrong things. And when they thought they had nothing, actually, they had the one thing that they absolutely needed. They needed their relationships with each other. And at that point of despair, Dan has a dream. He dreams about walking in a park in the middle of the night. It's pitch dark. He can't see anything. And because of that darkness, being all alone, he's frightened. And suddenly there's an image that appears to him of a wonderful image of a woman, of an elderly woman. And immediately all his sense of fear vanishes. And she gives him 3 words. Actually, they were in Latin. This was a dream I had before I came to Mother. It happens to Dan. And with that dream, that sense of protection, that I don't know who the mother is, I don't know who this woman is, but I felt there is that protection in my life. It comes to Dan at this moment of despair, the darkest hour before the dawn. It announces the dawn that's coming. For me, it announced, I don't remember whether it was a few days or a few weeks or a few months now, because I was not conscious of everything that was happening when the book actually fell, like it fell for Dan. In this case, it fell for Dan the next morning. I can't remember how long it was in my case, but it's announcing that the dawn is coming. You are in the darkness. The darkness is the darkness of ignorance and unconsciousness. And when the aspiration comes to be out of it, when we're aware of it and we aspire, that aspiration brings Mother's consciousness. It brings the light. That's why the aspiration is so important. The aspiration is what brings the descent of grace. The dark hour doesn't mean things are hopeless. The darkest hour is the announcement of the greatest opportunity. It means we're on the verge. Only thing is we have to do is call and pray, have faith and aspire. And in the story that your team was reading yesterday about Thomas Botha, we won't go into it because it'll take, but this is the same principle. When the whole economy of Czechoslovakia was in Great Depression, when unemployment was 25% and companies are going out of business right and left, this small shoe maker said, I'm going to go back and change everything I do. And in 5 years, he was the largest shoe manufacturer in the whole world, not in Czechoslovakia. For him, the darkest hour was the dawn of the greatest opportunity. And that's what it always represents. All we have to do is turn the corner. All we have to do is learn from what comes to us, what we should do to be more sincere and more conscious. And when we don't know, it's enough. He says, all we need to do is be sincere. Pray sincerely. Whatever it is in me that allows this to happen, whatever I need to learn, let me learn it. Whatever is false in me, even if I don't know it, I will have to give it up. I want to be sincere. Nothing else is necessary. That's what he says. Nothing. He says, these are the only conditions made. Sincerity and the rejection of falsehood. It's not enough, well, I'm ignorant and I don't know what to do. I have to sincerely want the knowledge and sincerely want to be true. So that comes to them. And the next morning, when Dan reads the message that NASA has false message it turned out to be. He reads a message on his computer that NASA has declined their contract. There's no hope for them. They've spent everything they have. They can't go on living. They can't pay their rent. They can't feed their families. They have to do something. So he's going to tell them when they come back on Monday, you better go back and get jobs. You all can get good jobs. They're all very talented people. And then he, just in despair, because he has to pass the weekend in no sense moping and crying, he turns on the TV and he watches this football game, which was a real game. Not then, but he watches a replay of a very, very famous game. I saw it, I don't know, I think in '88 or something like that. When a team that has struggled so much and been so good reaches the last 2 minutes of the championship Super Bowl game where everything is at stake. Nobody will remember the team that's gone second. Everything is at stake. When they have 100 yards there at the other end of the field with 2 minutes left, when they haven't been able to score in 58 minutes, And when their captain, the quarterback, Joe Montana, comes out on the field, I'm talking about what I actually saw on TV, he runs out on the field kind of bouncing like this, as if he's ready to celebrate, as if he's already won the game. We're all depressed. All the fans are depressed and disappointed. We don't even know how he has the courage to come out because the game seems to be over. And he's bouncing like this as if he's already won the game. And in 2 minutes, he does what he couldn't do in 58 minutes. And in the last 5 or 10 seconds, they win. And it was his third or fourth, which was a record at that time. And when you see it, you can't see his face. He's wearing a helmet. He's 100 yards away from the cameras and everything. But you could see his movements. And that inspires Dan. How can this man be so, he seems to be enjoying the darkest hour. He seems to be enjoying the pressure, unbelievable pressure. You can't have greater pressure than that. There are hundreds of millions of people watching this. Not only in America, but they were broadcasting internationally. Imagine 100 million people are watching you to see whether you make a mistake the next minute. That's pressure. To stand up in front of an audience with 50 or 100 people is enough to make us nervous. What do you do with 100 million when the whole world's going to know every mistake and blame you for not winning? And to feel the exhilaration of the challenge, to feel the pressure of the moment as a challenge. I can grow more. I can learn. There's something for me to learn. There's a dawn waiting for me when I get through with this. As I have mentioned to you a few times here, when Appa got the message about the Beautyland case being lost, he didn't bounce, he laughed. And for me, I was full of admiration that something he had worked so hard for so many years, and now the court says it's completely lost. And he was able to have that faith and that cheer, and it turned out to be the beginning of the dawn. The final dawn. And that's what happened there. So Dan is inspired by that. That's a life response for him, to see this. Dan's problems seem to be very small. After all, he can always go back and get a job. This man's, he's at the end of his career. They'll never forget this. It's on record to be celebrated or reviewed every year. And yet he was able to turn it around. And so Dan walks to the bookstore, and with that opening, the book falls. The book falls, and when he opens it, he reads the statement. It's enjoyment is accomplishment. Accomplishment is enjoyment. So he gave an opening. His opening was, let me not feel sorry for myself. Let me not blame life. Let me not blame my partners. Let me not say, I knew Vinay, we shouldn't have done this, we should have done something else. He doesn't blame anybody. He doesn't even blame himself. Well, if Joe Montana can be cheerful at a time like that, my problems were much less than his. I can always go get a job. I am not going to feel sorry for myself. It's only an ego trip. I'm not going to blame anybody else or react against anybody else. I have no right to be sorry. I should accept whatever comes happily, which is what Mother says. And that brings the book. That just doesn't, the next day it brings the NASA contract. The news gets reversed. Appa told me, I remember, it's already 1974 or something like that. He told me, I may have mentioned this because also one time he was sitting at home and news came from the garden, from Mother Estates, that the villagers have come and carried away the manager. They're very rough people, Padmanabhan. They carried him away. It's perfectly possible. They're all ex-convicts from the prison nearby. It's perfectly possible. They're very rough people. And he's a lean man. Appa said he refused to believe it. He refused to allow that vibration of fear that news to come and touch his emotions. What's the fact? He doesn't know. He refused to allow the vibration of fear or disturbance or depression to enter him. And within an hour or something, Padmanabhan walked in the door. And he said, what happened? Nothing happened. The news turned out to be false. So that's what happened with Dan. He doesn't know to consciously do it. Something in him was true. Something in him was sincere. Not sincere to an idea. Something in him was receptive to the true vibration, which for us is mother. And when mother's there, how can we ever be sad? How can we ever be sorry? If we're sorry, it means we have lost the truth. We've lost our sincerity. To feel sorry means is to forget mother, who has done everything, not for us, everything for the earth, everything for the universe. If we can forget that for a minute, it means we're ungrateful. He doesn't know mother. He doesn't know anything, but he was sincere. It's not necessary to be a mother's devotee to be true or sincere. We have an advantage, but it's not that, it doesn't mean only devotees can be. Anybody can be. Anybody can be sincere and true. And he was. And the result was, the next day, the situation completely reversed, and it became the first step of the dawn. Instead of the darkest hour, it became the dawn for the whole future, not just for them, but for humanity, because they changed the world. So not believing a negative news is faith. Do I have faith? I have faith when everything's going well for me. Can I not believe a negative news? Or even if I believe it, can I not sanction it? No, nothing will come to me except what is good. Nothing that will come to me except for a progress. Let me make that progress, whatever it is. Can we have that faith? If we can have that faith, that's all we need. Dan's decision that he should let the partners go is his act of sincerity, like Mary's, who lets Frank go. He wants to tell them. He doesn't want them to feel guilty. Okay, you desert us and everything. He says he decides that whatever it is, he has to continue, though he knows without them he's helpless. But he doesn't want to appeal to them to continue with him. He wants them to do what's right for them and what's best for them. And that decision he takes is a selfless decision, like Mary's decision about Frank. It not only makes them insist on staying, it changes the whole atmosphere. He does what he can do. What can we do? We can be sincere. We can be selfless, and we can be that at every moment. And as you said, Anita, the opportunity comes not with all their computer knowledge or anything. The opportunity comes simply because of their human relations. And the whole story is them discovering the value of those human relations. And it looks odd. They comment, I think it's Vinay who comments, 1 minute we were trying to create prosperity for the world, for the whole world, and the next minute we're asked to develop a computer program to help 4 or 6 astronauts who are locked up in a little shell to get along with each other. It looks so odd. You couldn't go from it's one extreme to the other, from saving the world to helping 6 people get along in a space station. And yet the truth is, if you can find the secret for 4 or 6 people to get along harmoniously and trust each other, you have the power to change the world and create it prosperous. If you really know that secret, the secret is not out there. The secret is in here. The secret is a discovery of the power of consciousness. The secret is not for the customers. The secret is with our relations with our own people, with our family, with our employees, with those we're into, our suppliers, with those if we find that secret, we unleash an infinite power. It's a power of consciousness, because the outer is only a response to the inner. The outer is only a reflection of the inner. In a company, it's the organization of the company is the inner. The society and the market are the outer. The power is always there with us. The power is always there with our attitudes. And this and all the stories and everything up our right says, we don't know at all the minute. We're looking, somebody should help me, some good thing should happen to me, I should get a job offer, I should get an appointment, I should do this and that, a marriage and that. We don't know. The power is all the time with us in our attitudes. It's always there with us. Last month, Ramesh came and Ramesh is very, very serious. When he takes up something Appa has written, he wants to follow it to the last drop. And he decided to take up this issue of cheerfulness. See, Mother says if you are always smile at life, life will always smile at you. He said, life is not smiling at me all the time. And you should be cheerful in every circumstance. So he began to look at every moment why I am not more cheerful. I have a fear. The fear is I have to give it up. I have a doubt. I have to reject the doubt. I have a suspicion. Get rid of the suspicion. Suspicion's a disease that will destroy all happiness in the world. He began to observe himself like a scientist with a microscope, like Sherlock Holmes at the scene of the crime. He began to, at any minute, if he's not feeling very happy, he says, why? I'm not happy. What's wrong with me? Where is some thief is there inside that's stealing my happiness. That thought, that feeling, that desire, that ambition, that greed, whatever it is. And he began one by one turning them around just to be happy all the time. It's a big project. It's a big project. It's a continuous project. It's a yoga 24 hours a day. Obviously, I can't have negative thoughts. Yesterday, you mentioned, supposing we have a great opportunity, suppose it doesn't work, we can do something else. Why do you want to suppose anything won't work? Mother is there. Why don't we suppose it works 10 times bigger? Every thought is geared to create problems for us. Every fear, yes, I know it's good, but supposing I risk this and I lose it, what happens? Yes, then we shouldn't do anything. No. If we're going to act out of fear, if we're going to act out of, he says, even when the news comes that Padmanabhan has been carried away by villagers or your estate has been lost, you shouldn't be sorry. How can you be sorry when Mother's dead? It means you have forgotten Mother. If we refuse that, life will always reverse itself. Life will bring something greater, not lesser. So I'm sorry he's not here. I wish he comes and talks to and explain his science, the science of cheerfulness. Obviously, you can't blame anybody for anything. You can't be angry about anything. You can't react against anything. All of that's the poison that pulls us down. You have to be equal at every minute, which is impossible, of course. The only thing we can do is, when we get disturbed, we can quickly give it up and run back to remember Mother as quickly as possible and not indulge in it. Think positively, feel positive. Yes,
the question, Ashok.
Okay, Ashok has a question. Very good.
Yes, I'll read it out. Every time a liberal and forward-thinking president serves the US, he is invariably followed by a horrible reactionary.
Sorry, Janani, it's breaking up. I heard the words, but they were broken. Can you repeat it?
Every time a liberal and forward-thinking president serves the US, he is invariably followed by a horrible reactionary. Is this the very order of nature?
Did anybody hear it clearly?
Maybe ask me to copy the message.
Is it a text message, Janani? Why
The
don't
text
you
is
show
there
text?
on. It's
Post
there in
it.
the chat. Okay.
Chat. Every time a liberal and forward-thinking president serves the United States, he's invariably followed by a horrible reactionary. Is this the very order of nature? Great. Well, it certainly is the order of politics in the US right now, but that's true. There's a truth in it. It's not just, say, the entrepreneur who risks everything out of an aspiration and a faith and grows his company. After achieving something at a higher level, he begins to say, I can't trust people. I'm afraid to invest more. I better hold on and be satisfied what I have, because the next time I might fail. It's human consciousness. It's human consciousness that when everything goes well, we have inbuilt in us a suspicion or a conviction that we're lucky and it won't last. And we're right. Because we believe it won't last, we believe in misfortune, we believe in failure. It's deeply conditioned in us over thousands of years. It's the subconscious, it's the darkness, it's the falsehood. When I succeed out of courage, out of aspiration, out of generosity, the next time I am not so courageous or generous or aspiring. And so we go back and forth. So nature constantly goes back and forth from one thing to another. It makes a progress, but we make that progress through these ups and downs. We have moments of great inspiration of mother, and then other times we feel abandoned. He explains spiritually, when our higher consciousness opens, we make a progress, but the progress is not complete because the knowledge we accept in our mind and our heart, we haven't fully accepted in our vital and our body. So the circumstances come until we make the progress at a deeper level. Sri Aurobindo writes about it. It's the theory or the philosophy of the going ups and downs. It's true in society. It's true for the individual. It's true in life. It's true in spirit. The important thing for us is to learn from our past experiences, and if we can consecrate them, we can overcome that tendency to slide back. What comes up as the doubt or the insecurity or the fear is only something at a deeper level. Say, when the man who created Nala silk, when he had only 7,000 rupees, he felt he could risk it and give it to customer. When he had 70,000 crores or 700 crores, could he do the same thing? To grow, say, now I'm satisfied, let me not risk everything. Where we call the limit, life stops opening. We call Mother intensely when we have a problem. When everything's going all right, when Appa says you can call in Mother intensely all the time, everything's all right now, I need not, that's too difficult. We set the limit. So it's a very good question, Ashok. I think there are many answers, but fundamentally it is, we need to go through experience until the realization is in the very material consciousness, most material consciousness that Sri Aurobindo talks about. So we achieve at one level, but doesn't mean we have brought it down to the deepest level where the truth of Mother's consciousness is there in our very physical. So things come up from the lower levels which haven't been touched. And so we have to make further progress. It's a very good question. This minute observation, which we can best do in our own lives, I'm trying to do in the story to show the attitudes, the change in attitudes, and how life responds to them. Janani is working on her book on Pride and Prejudice, and she's really, I think, developing a vision of life in the story and seeing minutely. For me, the idea that the outer life is really a reflection of the inner life is the greatest science. It doesn't exist in the world of science. The Western world or the scientific world doesn't have this knowledge, which is there for thousands of years in India in some measure. I don't think it was codified to the perfection that Appa has done. This is the science of the future. It's not the life science of biology, it's the science of life. And if the Westerner knew that this science exists, or when he knows that it exists, he will drop all his technology, he will close Silicon Valley and come wherever that knowledge is available, because that's the knowledge of human accomplishment, not just in marriage or jobs or money. That's the power of human accomplishment in life, which all our money and all our technology doesn't give us. It doesn't help, doesn't guarantee we'll be happy. It doesn't prevent the climate or the earth from changing or wars from coming. This is an ultimate knowledge, which Appa says is there in the soil of India. And he keeps claiming, to my great disbelief, that there's somebody in every village of India who has this knowledge. But whether there's one in the country or one in every village or one in every household, it's a great knowledge that this society has nurtured and developed over thousands of years so it can give it to the whole world. Not so that it can be better than everybody else, so it can spread this spiritual knowledge of life. Having discovered Satchidananda is an ultimate discovery. Anybody see? We give Nobel Prizes for somebody who discovers quantum physics or the theory of relativity or DNA or some silly technical things we give the Nobel Prize. Somebody discovered the ultimate truth of existence is Satchidananda. But all that pales into insignificance when you know that this is Satchidananda. This is Satchidananda. And there's a knowledge by which you can reveal this inside and outside, and that's what the whole universe is for. And Appa has reduced it to a set of instructions and guidelines for us. A single word, which is a universe, consecration, yes. He's reduced it to a product and a technique. They have done it, Sri Aurobindo has done it, but Appa has made it real. And he's given us a code, a map. As he said, life divine is the horoscope of the universe. He's given us the key to all the problems of humanity, all the problems of existence, and all the future treasures to uphold. So before we get the key to unlock it, to have the vision of the reality of the inner-outer correspondence, it's difficult. I used to say that if we discover one reason for something that happened in a day, we feel we've made a great discovery. And we usually discover that it's somebody else's fault. It's my credit if it was good, and it's somebody else's fault if it was bad. But this is it's a start, but it's like 1 and 1 is 2. Doesn't give us the mathematics of the universe or the mathematics of life. It's only the first premise. The truth is, at every minute, everything that happens to everyone is a reflection in the outer of the inner. and to discover that code, to get that vision that we can see, that correspondence, that itself is such a great knowledge that even in the spiritual traditions was very rare. What Janani is doing is she's getting it with regard to Pride and Prejudice. Janani, you want to try? You know, what we've heard so far is not really clear, so I'm afraid to.
Yes.
I would like you to give a link at the end of the meeting, or post it up. Do a post of your impressions, first impressions, chapter 17 in KYNet, so everybody can see it. But what she's doing there is she takes the opening scene of P&P, which is apparently very insignificant, and shows the first words that Mrs. Bennet speaks to Mr. Bennet, and the first words that he speaks back to her, unfold through the whole story, the events of the whole story. His teasing her about this and that little simple interaction which we do all the time. We fool with each other, we say words that we don't mean, we do. Every word she sees is having profound impact on the story, and it's a vision. It's a vision confined to one incident in one story. If we have that vision in our life, if we have the knowledge of what's the significance of every word I have said and every word I say now and I'm going to say later, and we see that rolling out and unfolding itself in life, the moment we know that, we also now have the technique. Yeah, I shouldn't have said that. Darcy definitely shouldn't have called her tolerable. When they're at the dinner table and Mr. Bennet says, I got a letter 2 weeks ago. It's very interesting. He got this letter 2 weeks ago and he tells the family about it. 2 weeks later, he said, we're expecting a guest for dinner tonight. He waits 2 weeks to tell them that there's a guest coming tonight. And immediately Mrs. Bennet said, oh, Mr. Bingley is coming. He says, no, it's nobody you know who I've ever met before. No, she says, no, it's not Bingley. The only other one it could be is Charlotte. If it's Charlotte, my food, I don't have to worry about any special food. What we normally eat is good enough for Charlotte. That's her response. The man who's coming is coming. He's the heir to Longbourn. He's coming to give that to one of the Bennet daughters. Mrs. Bennet thinks of Charlotte. It's good enough for Charlotte. The fortune goes to Charlotte. That little innocent thing shows the whole future. The fortune goes to Charlotte. She decided, oh, it's Charlotte. She says, it's good enough. Yeah. Life is more than very subtle. Life is like that. So I encourage you all to read it's only 4 or 5 pages or what. It's beautifully written. She has discovered the links in one little story. It's not in one little story. It's there in every story. It's there in every chapter. It's there in every incident. Most importantly, it's there in our own lives. But if we see it somewhere, we can become more conscious to look at it elsewhere. For these characters in my story, they don't have the advantage of knowing anything of Indian tradition, knowing anything of inner and outer, knowing anything of what Mother and Sri Aurobindo have said. They have to discover this knowledge step by step. They didn't have the advantage of knowing Appa. They have to discover it step by step for themselves out of the problems they have and with the help of the book. We have the help of a lot more than a book to discover it in our lives. What they have is the sincerity to recognize what their knowledge tells them and to act on it, to make that knowledge power. And that's what impresses me so much about the story. It's not the knowledge. It's that sincerity to convert knowledge into power, which is what Appa always insists on. The sincerity is not what your mind understands, but what your vital, your emotions, your vital, and your physical accepts and acts on. That's the measure of sincerity. And that is the power that can change the world. And that's the power that can make India prosperous overnight, or all of us accomplish the highest aspirations we have, and double India, and convert a company from 5 or 10 crores to 100 crores. That's the work, our work. It's a work in consciousness. Senthil Murugan raises a number of questions about initiative, and I thought I could answer a few of them. I've asked him to put his questions in the KYNet, so I'll try to elaborate answers sometime there. But the distinction that Appa says, non-initiative, non-reaction, we understand, I think, silent will, non-reaction. Why non-initiative? It's confusing to some people, maybe to many people. By initiative, we mean the ego acting, our nature acting. We act out of our habit, we act out of our training, we act out of our social conditioning. That's initiative. When we refuse to act out of our self-interest, our training, our social conditioning, our preferences, when we do something out of the highest values we can say it's not an initiative of the ego. We could say that Mary took initiative by giving up Frank. Frank didn't ask her, will you release me? She took the initiative to write the letter, but it wasn't an initiative of her ego that wanted to get something and please herself. It was an initiative of the depths of her being, we can say her soul or her psychic, whatever, wanting to do the right thing. It was an action not from her nature, it was an action from her being, from the highest point of her consciousness, wanting to do the right thing. So, to understand non-initiative, I think it really means we must give up egoistic initiative. If at each moment we act, the right thing to do is to consecrate. If we really consecrate, even the action may not be necessary. Most actions are not necessary. But if we consecrate to act from the highest values and the greatest sincerity we can, then we can say it's not an initiative. Mrs. Bennett takes initiative to send Jane on horseback in the hope that Jane will be stuck at Netherfield overnight and can meet Bingley, who's not going to be there when she comes for dinner with Carolyn and Louisa. Her initiative's an egoistic initiative. It's a cunning, clever plot. The result is the rain does come. The rain comes early and gets Jane sick, and she has to overstay for a week. And by the end of the week, Carolyn and Darcy are so alarmed by the proximity of Jane that they want to take Bingley away from Netherfield forever. So the initiative backfired because it was an egoistic initiative. Yes, question.
Fran's mother also, she takes the initiative of asking her to going to maintain pre-planned numbers. But that gives her son and the family a positive outcome. Whereas Mrs. Bennett is taking the initiative, Lady Kathleen also has taken initiative. But that is all not part of these kind of results. So,
It's a very good point. You know, Lady Arabella takes many initiatives in the story, and all of them backfire. This initiative doesn't backfire, as you said. It doesn't have the result she expected. It has an opposite result. But it also, that opposite result is good for her. For her. Appa's argument is She has asserted her importance. She has used the power she had in the society. She has been mean to Mary. She has told all that she banished her from Greshambury, from the home. She didn't even want her friends to meet her. She did all of those things. Nothing changed Frank's love for Mary. And incidentally, even this initiative didn't change Frank, didn't convince Frank to give her up. He came back with the firm decision he's not going to give her up. So it was not her initiative that succeeded. It was Mary's initiative that succeeded, Mary's non-egoistic initiative that succeeded in bringing the money. Frank was going to determine to marry Mary regardless. He didn't know any money was there. So in that sense, Lady Arabella's initiative didn't work. If you want to say it worked in the sense that it made Mary make a great progress, which brought the solution, then we can say what Appa's argument says is there's a truth in Lady Arabella's concern for her son. All the self-importance and meanness that she's leave that aside. When she went to marry, she doesn't go offensively. She's pleading for the welfare of her son. In that spark of genuine maternal, not even for her, not because her relatives won't respect her if we lose the money, just purely for the sake of her son. That genuine sincerity has a positive result. It doesn't mean that it's a pardonable thing she did. It could have worked much better. It worked out this way. But it means we can argue that there was a truth in her motive. And for the first time, all the rest was the falsehood on the, let me show by power, I can banish her. She's nothing. She's illegitimate child. We don't want anything to do with it. But there's another consequence. Because she has done that, her relationship to Mary is permanently different. Mary no longer has to have any subordination to her or gratitude to her, because Mary has given up everything and gotten everything. So if she hadn't done that, Mary would have forever felt a different relationship. Like Mrs. Bennet, who can't even go to Longbourn, or rather Pemberley, or Wickham, who can't show his face. Lady Arabella has exhausted herself. Mary is not under her mother-in-law in any respect. She doesn't listen to anybody. She does what she wants after that. She's been liberated from all the gratitude which she felt she owed to the Greshams. So in one sense, she has exhausted the last claim on Mary. And Mary acts as a free person. Mary, who was always deferential, even after you remember, even after she finds out from Dr. Thorne that she's the heiress, Dr. Thorne says, shall I call the squire, Frank's father, and ask them to come here to meet you upstairs? She says, no, I have always gone to him. I will always go to him. She decides. That's not the case with the mother. The mother, when she meets Mary, faints because she's so embarrassed. She's exhausted herself. So, very interesting question.
There's a question in chat from Ashokan.
Okay. Why are you against initiative? America is what it is today because of the initiatives that settlers took to develop the country. Great. I repeat, action, we need a word to distinguish action from initiative. So we'll change the label for the sake of clarity. You cannot not act. Even in the Gita, I think Krishna says, you're acting even when I decide to keep quiet, it's an act. Thinking is an act. Feeling is an act. You cannot stop acting. Even if I decide not to get up or ask for a glass of water, that's an act. It's a decision not to speak. So action is there as long as we're in the manifestation. That action can be an action of the ego for the sake of the false egoistic consciousness, or it can be an action of the psychic, of the soul, trying to be expressing the truth of the spirit. What we mean by initiative is the action of the ego. What we mean by a consecrated act or a surrendered act is an action sanctioned and motivated and an action of the divine through us, of the spirit in and through us, not an action of the ego. So that's what we mean. Then why don't we clarify and why call everything an initiative? Because 99.99% of our acts are egoistic acts. Everything we do as an initiative is an egoistic act. Why do you want to add a long adjective on every time we're talking? We can clarify a consecrated act is not an initiative. A surrendered act is not an initiative. That's simple. Then Americans are taking initiative all the time. Or that's how the country got. We're all taking initiative all the time, whether it's to command other people to work for us or working for ourselves. If there's any, and remember, let's put it in perspective, what Americans have created is physical prosperity. It doesn't mean they've created universal happiness or universal equality or family feeling or spiritual enlightenment. They have created material prosperity. Material prosperity comes from a willingness for hard work, for a sense of responsibility, for physical values like perfection and cleanliness and punctuality, physical values, physical perfection. And that physical perfection has brought prosperity. It hasn't brought social harmony and psychological happiness, and we all live happily ever after. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. We would have had the answer to everything. So those values, you can say, when you take responsibility, to be responsibility means to act non-egoistically. Especially like Darcy, if you take consciousness responsibility. Saraswati's our devotee in the US. She's writing very sincerely. Everything in her environment, of her family and everything in her environment, she's asking where I have gone wrong, what I should do. Children, family, everything. What a sincerity. To take consciousness responsibility is definitely not an act of ego. You want me to find myself responsible for everything that everybody's doing wrong. That's the very opposite. The ego wants to blame everybody else for everything that happens to me. That's the egoistic attitude. For me to blame myself for everything that happens to everybody else is a complete reversal of it. So there are work values. The Americans and many others even have taken those values as sacred, like cleanliness is next to godliness, is a Protestant value also. Punctuality is like that. So that prosperity comes from that adherence to material values, and also Sri Aurobindo says, to the power of organization. He said Americans have a genius for organization, social organization, not human relations, how to organize the society to get work done, not how to organize the culture to get happiness for everybody. So in that measure, you can say values are non-egoistic. That's why in company, that's why values are so important. Values are spiritual skills, Appa says. So when you act out of values, you don't do it because I want it or the ego prefers it. You do it because it's right. It's a non-egoistic thing. You keep it clean. You don't waste water. Why? It's not my water. I'm not paying for the water. Doesn't matter if no. The value is you don't waste. It's not because I'm paying. It's not because I'm going to lose something. You don't waste time. You don't treat material things in a careless way. You don't allow dirt inside the house or outside the house or anywhere because it shouldn't be. It's wrong. So when we act out of values, we're not acting egoistically. We can. In the name of values, we can do anything. But if we're really sincere to the value, when we tell other people to act out of values, that's different. That's the ego. When we act out of values, we're taking responsibility, consciousness responsibility. So I hope that clarifies and puts America's achievements in some perspective also at the same time. Okay. So, the four characters have come together. It's interesting that at the Millennium Conference, Dan, Anya, Vinay, and Ray are there. Stern is there. Joseph Stern is there. Professor Dent is there. Levin, who's there, is there. And even Simon is there. All the key characters in the story who don't even know each other, before they're going to know each other and come into relation, they're brought to the same place at the same time because it's an hour of God. There's something bigger than them. There's something bigger that's working itself out. Mother said that all those who came to her came because they aspired in their previous lives to be there when the supramental descends. You can say things, if the book came to you or a journal came to you, came here somehow. Somebody came to you, information came. If you are here, it's because before you knew that you wanted to be here or should be here, already life was conspiring to fulfill your aspiration and bring you. So this confluence at the conference of people who don't know why they're there, don't know each other. None of them know Simon except Professor Dent, which only comes out at the end of the story. And they never meet Dent later in the story, but their actions are determining in Dent's life, in the life of his efforts to control the book. All of them come because this is a momentous moment. At a moment that's momentous, all of the forces are attracted and the people are attracted, just like we are all here today, together for some reason, which none of us can explain easily how we got here. If we trace the paths, we have to go back through the biography of each person to birth and trace it to figure out how we all got here today and why some people aren't here and why some people are. So these four characters came together. They didn't know each other before. They met under a unique moment, a unique point, and they bonded with each other and found some shared aspiration. They're very different people from very different backgrounds, as are all of we also. But that one shared aspiration, one commonality is enough to bring us together for a moment. Some people we meet for one moment in a lifetime. Some people we meet and they become the rest of our life. What determines that? What is that determining factor? What's that relationship? It's there in every case, whether it's for a minute, a passing thing, or for a lifetime, or whether it's for 10 years intensively and then it's over and we never see them again. Everything has a significance. Appa has been discovering and unraveling the rules that explain that in his own life. Why somebody keeps coming back in his life, why somebody comes back after 50 years, why a memory of somebody comes back for so long and then vanishes. He has studied it. He's a science. It's a scientific study. It's a spiritual science of life. Whether we study it or not, whether we know it or not, it happens. And the story, it's happening in our lives. Otherwise, it's happening to all of us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be who we are. It happens to the characters in the story. The difference between them and us is they're completely oblivious, unconscious of the fact that there can be any significance in who they meet or why things happen as they do. Because like a foolish, ignorant American, they just don't understand that what happens outside is related to what happens inside. And that's what Dent is teaching as a philosophy at the conference. He's saying everything's chance and necessity. There are certain things happen because they have to happen, and other things just happen for no reason at all. He's preaching pure materialism, which is what I was raised with. What most Americans are raised with, unless you have some kind of a superstitious religious belief which doesn't really explain things, but we say it's God's will, which is true, but that doesn't mean we understand it. If there's not God's will, then it's chance. So the discussion, the debate at the conference between Stern and I can't know your minds because I didn't grow up in India. I only know what I've learned coming here. I can't imagine how similar or different your views are, except a lot of the young Indians who got educated, I know, think more like Americans. I don't know. You've lost some of the truth of it because we're enamored of prosperity and technology. But there's a critical debate coming here. Stern and Dent are fighting for the souls of the people. Because as long as you believe what Dent says, you can never discover the truth of your own being. And you can never perfect your outer life. Because you miss the fundamental link between the inner and the outer. And for all its greatness, for all its tremendous greatness in the spiritual traditions of the world, if India knew this, they forgot it. The rishis forgot it. They got so carried away by Satchidananda, and who wouldn't? You lose your head. If you get the lottery and you get the $10 million or 10,000 crores, it's hard to think of anything else. When you got the lottery of moksha, it's very hard to worry about why this thing happened and this thing happened. But it turns out to be more important to know why this thing happened and that than know how to get to moksha. Because this is where the realization has to come. And that's the knowledge. So the apparent debate, maybe you're not interested in artificial intelligence, and maybe who cares what these professors say and their philosophy and science and everything. But there is an essence. It reduces to the essence. Is there such a thing as chance? If there's such a thing as chance, it means ultimately we are not free. Ultimately, there's no free will. I may decide what to do, but if whether it will happen is really out of my control, then I have missed the fundamental spiritual truth of existence for which our souls have come here. There is no such thing as chance. And that's what they're debating. If you ask Stern, how can you say that? He can't explain it. It's at best an intuition. He's not, as far as I know anyway, maybe I'll change my mind when I read further. As far as I know, he's not spiritually illumined, and he doesn't have all the secrets of the universe. He's not read Life Divine when the story begins. But his intuition is that what Dent says is false. And whatever it is, don't be tricked by his gestures and his very mesmerizing speech and his arguments and everything, because fundamentally it dehumanizes you. The moment you believe that what happens to you depends on other people and the life around you or chance, or you lose the spiritual essence, the spiritual truth of your being. And that's what they're fighting about. And that's the thing that gets worked out through the whole story. And that's the significance of India. If India is going to bring this truth to the world, India must first make conscious what's there in the soil here. As long as we believe that we're helpless because of our karma, we're with dead. Whether it's the laws of nature or the laws of karma, we're on the other side. We're on the side of helplessness. Only when we discover the truth that the power is with us, that's the supramental truth, that's the supramental power, only then we can be on the side of truth and sincerity, which the world needs, not just India, the whole world needs it. It's our future. So, these characters have a hard time understanding what's going on around them or why it's happening. It takes a long time, especially I showed, and we'll come back to it, in the life of Ray Berger. Things are happening with his family. They all happened to me in my life. It took me a long time, even when Appa was telling me, for me to understand the significance. They have no grounding in the knowledge to help them make a connection. So we just ignore the things. So anyway, now they have got the NASA contract, and their job is human relations. They have to try to figure out not how to make millions on the stock market, but how to have harmony among the four of them, which means you have to become conscious of what the ego is, of the power of attitudes and opinions and urges and everything. You have to begin to go inside. It's the first step from going out to going in. And everything that happens to them after that becomes an experiment, a living experiment for them to discover the secret of their harmony. And each time they discover it, even if they're not conscious of it, each thing they learn helps their world expand. And the power that comes is not an ordinary power. And that's why Appa's been saying from the beginning, the family is the seat of all power. Where the closest human relations are there within the family. If we can figure out the yoga or the technology of that relationship, we have the power for everything. I posed it as a problem because this is how Western psychology would take it. Their job is, you're going to send 6 people up, 4 people initially, this is true, and then 6 people, and they're going to be together on a space station for 6 months at a time in a very, very small physical space. I'm not exactly sure what the area inside the space station is, but just imagine if 2 people have to live in this space, or even a place twice as much, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 6 months. I'm not talking about a happily married couple, if there is one. I'm not talking about a mother and her child enjoying each other. I'm not talking about best friends, people who don't even know each other. The only thing they have in common is they have some technical, from different countries, by the way, from different religions, grown up in different cultures. They have to find a way to understand and live harmoniously together. So the traditional scientific Western approach is, let's look at the statistics. Let's do studies of millions of people and find out what are the patterns of who will be compatible with who. Should it be all men? Should it be all women? Should it be all from one country? It can't be. It's an international space station. They have to come. Should it be all people who are electrical engineers? It can't be. They need people from all different skills. They're not allowed to pick and choose according to some criteria. Then how are they going to do it? And even if you picked and chose 6 people, if after 6 months one of them leaves, you have to find somebody who's going to be compatible with all the others. Is there such a thing? This is the Western approach. We'll use the statistics. It amounts to trying to understand what makes for human harmony. I can only speak for Western psychology and say there is no theory of human harmony today, even after 100 years of psychological science. There are some common sense things to solve problems, but what makes for harmonious relationships, there's no theory. And it's like there are a lot of theories about war and what causes war, but there are no theories about peace. Peace is the normal condition. War is an unusual condition, fortunately less and less usual. There is no theory of peace. There's no theory of harmony. We have a lot of theories for what causes quarrels, but how to have harmony. So Dan begins to wonder, we can't follow that method. How are we going to find it? How can we pick and choose the people? Even with all the efforts of society for thousands of years to teach us how to pick the right spouse, we don't have a very great track record for eternal bliss and perfect harmony. How are we going to do it with 6 people who are needed because of their technical skills from different countries? And even in the family, we don't live in a small room with the same person for 24 hours a day for 6 months without seeing anybody else or watching a movie or going outside, at least for shopping, or send them to work. Or it's an extreme condition. So this makes them essentially try to discover what are the sources of disharmony. And that's where they ultimately come to the power of decisions, which will be their first great discovery. Which, huh?
It's like a reality show.
The reality is a show.
Yeah.
Reality is a show. Dan already begins to wonder. Remember, he's completely ignorant. At one moment, it looks like everything was going wrong and everything was over. And the next day, suddenly, everything is reversed. Why did they reverse? Why did it reverse? He has absolutely no idea. He knows. At one point, it was the darkest hour. The next day, it looks like a great opportunity has come. He sees it. He sees something has gone from wrong to right. He didn't know why it went wrong in the first place. Now it goes right. It's all a mystery. That's what makes us believe in gods or fate or the astrology or something else, because we don't understand what it has to do with us. When we don't understand what it has to do with us, we look for other explanations. Maybe it's the black cat that went by or the mirror that broke. Maybe it's the astrological constellations in the sky, or maybe it's that man who has bad Rasi who came. And we're trying out of our superstition to come to some explanation for why things happen. The Westerner will be equally superstitious or won't even ask. It happened, it just happened. We're ignorant. So this is the beginning of knowledge. How can you create a computer program to help everybody in the world when you don't know how to help yourself? When you don't have the knowledge to help yourself? So now the book has come. And he has questions. He has lots of questions because he doesn't understand anything about his life, except he has an aspiration. So the book becomes a guide to try to help him to become more conscious and learn the rules of life. And when he comes across in the reading this phrase, the character of life. This was direct from my own experience after knowing Appa for about 2.5 years. He sent us back to LA to spend a few months with my parents, and I think I've told some of you this already. An American who was teaching in the ashram school, teaching English, came to Appa and said, can you tell me anything about teaching English? And Appa wrote a 1.5-page paper on teaching English literature. I'm sure that paper is on KYNet. It was written, how many? 55 years ago. And in the second page, at the top paragraph, he said that the great literature, good ordinary literature, entertains us by an exciting plot. The good literature brings out the role of human character in the plot. We see that character is important. The great literature shows the action in the context of human character and the social environment in which people live. But the greatest literature, the ultimate greatest literature in the world, reveals the character of life itself. I was sitting in Los Angeles at that time in my parents' home and reading this character of life. I studied psychology and I studied human character. And even human character we don't understand. But now he's talking about the character of life. The character of life is not even a subject in psychology. In fact, it's not a subject in any scientific discipline, even today. I'm talking 40 years later. What is this character of life? So I wrote to Appa, I said, this is very intriguing and interesting paper. This subject is very interesting. What is this thing called character of life? And essentially, the last 45 years, we started, when I went back, he said, let's start with Shakespeare, and you'll see why Sherbindo calls Shakespeare a seer of life, because every action in Shakespeare's plays reveals the character of life, but you have to know how to learn it. For me, it's been, it's an unknown science. It hasn't been formulated and created yet. Appa's been giving it to us through the stories and P&P. So for Dan, this is the beginning. What is character? Does life have a character? It means that life is acting in a particular way. I don't see how life is acting. I don't know why something good happens or bad happens like that. He doesn't know the key. It looks like chance and So that question comes in Dan's mind. And that question is the key to the whole rest of the story. What is life? And what does it have to do with me? And what do the consequences and results have to do with me? Because ultimately, the knowledge that they have brought down, that knowledge that is power, is a knowledge to not only understand what has happened, but that's only like the historian, we can write it afterwards. It's the knowledge to change anything. It's the knowledge to make it change by our acts, by our consecration. And that's what Appa's been insisting on. Not just to make us cheerful, as happy and nice as that is, not just to solve our problems, but to give us the knowledge by which we can accomplish anything, and more than that, we can accomplish something. We can accomplish what Mother wants. We can accomplish what the divine wants in the world, not what we want. And that's what we learn. The more we grow, the more we acquire the knowledge, the more we discover, the best thing for us to accomplish is not what we want at all. The best thing for us to accomplish is to let the divine will express in us, because that's the truth of our being, and that's sincerity. So this is the beginning of a child in kindergarten starting the path. And from that point of view, the most educated Westerner is a kindergartner trying to discover this greatest truth that exists in the world. And in that sense, every challenge is an opportunity, because every challenge that comes to us to awaken us, to understand something we haven't understood, to give us a power that we haven't had up until now. So they get the contract with NASA, and incidentally, just at the same time this happens, within a few days after Dan finds the book, Diego goes into the same bookstore. Diego is Simon's man, and discovers that the book is there. Now, the book could be anywhere in the world, and we don't know how many people Simon has out looking for the book, but it's very large numbers, and they're spending a lot of money on people hunting for the book. But how can it be that a few days after Dan finds the book, Diego has been to this bookstore before. He's only responsible for California or a few states. There are only a few hundred bookstores in the area. He's been to this bookstore before. Between the time he was there last and this time, the book has come there, how we don't know. Dan has come and got it, and Diego's able to discover, because it was remembered by the clerk that there was a book without a price on it and a name on it, and it was such an odd thing, she remembered it, and Diego got the information. How is it possible? Is it simply the author, my lack of imagination? I came up with a flimsy circumstance. In my experience, it's as real as the fact that the four of them would be there at the conference together. There's no chance in the world. I think I may have told this story. I don't want to branch off with a long story, but if some of you may remember, absolutely true for us and very significant. We had a contract, I'm talking in 1977, we had a contract with a company in Pondicherry for exporting and selling incense in the United States. And the company violated the contract and sold directly to our own customer, which it might have taken us a year to figure out under normal circumstances. Or maybe we wouldn't have figured it out. When the shipment of incense arrives in Los Angeles from that company to my own customer directly, which I know nothing about, one of my staff members goes down to the port, big Los Angeles port, one of the biggest in the world, to get something that's coming for us. And at that time, there were no containers. Everything came in crates. So while the workers are carting and putting the crates on our lorry for us, he gets tired and he sits down on a crate to rest. And he just happens to look down at the crate, and this crate looks very familiar to him. And when he reads on the side of the crate, it's the crate from our supplier in Pondicherry going to our customer. So before the customer even receives the thing, sent 10, 11,000 miles away, we knew it before he did. And when I went the next day to the company that exported it, and I said, you have broken the contract and you're selling directly to my customer, it's a violation of the contract. He denied it vehemently. I said, don't tell me any stories. We know the crate, which ship it came on. We know the whole thing. We know the whole thing. He was completely bewildered because he thought he could get away with it. It looked like we have spies everywhere. In P&P, think about it. Do you think of any incident in the story that's very close to this?
Yes, sir. State
Mike?
Georgiana.
Huh?
Rasi, who was state Georgiana. He was not a parent.
Great. If he hasn't come at that moment, Georgiana would have eloped. The whole thing is over. The whole life is over. Great. Can you think of anything else?
Darcy is coming to the Huntsfield. Also, it's happening.
Yes. I'm thinking particularly of disclosure of an information. The one
Lydia elopes. The moment he arrives and she's trying
very good. The moment that, but the one that's all true, but the really striking one was when Darcy is planning to propose to Elizabeth at Huntsford. She doesn't know it. Nobody knows it. Just an hour before he's coming to propose, Elizabeth meets Fitzwilliam out in the park by chance just by chance. They begin to talk, and they come to a discussion about marriage and everything by chance. And Fitzwilliam says that about Darcy, Darcy recently saved one of his good friends from an unfortunate marriage. Fitzwilliam doesn't know anything about Jane. He's never met Bingley. He doesn't know that he's talking about Jane. He doesn't know that this is about Elizabeth's sister. 15, 20 minutes later, Elizabeth goes inside and Darcy comes to propose to him. How will he feel? How will she feel when she says to him, "You have spoiled the happiness of my sister"? How did you know that? The information comes exactly at that time. That's what happened to us. That's true to life. The more you try to conceal something, the more it comes out. That's the character of life, because it's like the more angry we are at a person, the more we energize them. The more we think of something, even to keep it a secret. If you really want to keep a secret, you should forget it. As long as you remember it, you energize it. And this is something is intensely energized. When Darcy's thinking of proposing to her, he must be thinking, if she ever finds out that I spoiled the happiness of Jane, she'll never pardon me. She may not accept me. Because he has that thought and that or that feeling, even if it happens. So this is true to life.
Same thing can be mapped with Tupurin song and cake and diamond ring also. So the moment he's going along with his friend in order to they find out the case, at that moment he was feeling very hungry. So he saw that some cakes were there at the table. So he's taken the cake and he wanted to eat that. But at that
without
moment,
being seen, right? Without being seen.
Without being seen. So then he saw that his friend is coming inside. So he is by hiding the cake back, and then his friend is able to identify what you are hiding. So he is showing off, and then they saw the diamond ring in the cake. So we can map that also.
Exactly. All stories, all life. Why stories? Stories are easier because we can share it.
So, the truth will reveal itself.
The more we try to hide it,
Yes.
the more intensely we try. It's our intensity that energizes it. We forget many things and they go, but we add to the intensity of it.
So is this mapped with the characters? Actually, behavior, character, personality, and individuality. So if you take into all these four, this act comes to which part?
Of course, we're talking about, in the case of my export,
Yes.
I won't go into detail. It was the character of that man. He came from a place where doing things, saying one thing and doing another was deeply ingrained in the national character. Each situation may be different. Let's say it's not, these stages are stages of development, but this is regarding vital attitudes. This is not a stage of development. We all have attitudes, we all have opinions, it's there in everybody. But when it acquires the power of an attitude, it gets energized. The vital energizes it. It acquires the power. Mrs. Bennet's roofs, Darcy's roofs, were done with a strong formed vital attitude, with the belief that they can get away with it. Darcy never dreamed when he interfered with Bingley's marriage to Jane that he would be proposing to her sister 3 months later. Very untenable position, no? Having said, you can't marry, she's too low. Darcy's much higher, the distance is much greater. If he's conscious, he would have seen the attitude he has to give up long before he met her at Longbourn and got refused. He would have said, you see the irony? I foolishly told Bingley not to marry Jane. Now I want to marry Elizabeth. What will he think when I do it? He didn't reflect. He just unconsciously acted. So this question is there because Dan doesn't know anything. So he looks for an answer. How can you explain this? What possible relationship can there be between what I think, feel inside and what happens outside? What is this thing, life? So he discovers a line in the book. This is right from Shervin. Life is the dynamic play of a universal energy, a conscious force that builds and maintains the world. It's a philosophical statement right out of Life Divine, chapter, I think 10, on conscious force. But the key word here is, life is the play of a conscious force. That's not the understanding of the scientists. That's not even the understanding of Indian tradition. In the science, life is the play of chance and necessity. There are physical laws of nature and the rest is up to chance. You can't predict. According to Indian tradition, life is Prakriti. Life is nature. Nature is a material, unconscious force. There's no consciousness in nature. There's no intention in nature. It just goes its own way. His key to Life Divine is that life is a conscious force. Whose conscious force? Who's the consciousness? Who's determining it? What's behind it? To understand that fully, we have to understand the whole book. Ultimately, he says that conscious force that is behind the whole universe is what is called in the tradition the Divine Mother, the Shakti. The Shakti is the force of the Ishvara that creates the universe. We see it apparently unconscious, apparently doing things that we don't understand because we are not conscious of the truth of the world in which we live. We don't understand why things are happening. We don't understand what we should learn from what happens. We don't understand how to attune ourselves to what's happening and what the intention is so things go smoothly. And all the laws that Appa is teaching us and all the examples he's giving are helping to try to align us to that truth without understanding the philosophy, which Sri Aurobindo gives in great detail. That's why he says that there's no waste in nature. How can Sri Aurobindo say there's no waste in nature? There's waste everywhere. We see waste. We waste time. We waste things. Everything we see in life. Huh?
Waste is from our point of view.
From our point of view, there's waste. From the point of view of that conscious force, even what we consider a waste is for a purpose. Even if we keep wasting it until we finally become conscious, it's not a waste. It's the thing necessary to make us conscious. So Dan reads a philosophical statement, which I read 50 years ago, having no idea that it was a personal message. Having no idea that this applies to me and my life and what happens to me the next minute.
So even this carbon emission and global warming.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is those wastes necessary for...
Exactly. And can you come up with any explanation for us?
Now people started finding solution for that. I mean...
he said, just to be sure everybody heard, even this global warming means it's not a waste. Why is it happening? See, if you ever watch Hollywood movies, it's probably Bollywood also, there's only one time when human beings all unite together. It's when there's an invasion from outer space. The only time All human beings, regardless of country, forget their nationality, religious differences and everything, they all come together, is to fight the alien invasion. The global warming is the first problem of humanity that can only be solved by everybody cooperating with everybody else. It's not enough that we give up burning coal in India. If China continues to burn coal, we'll get the same global warming without doing anything wrong. Unless everybody solves the problem, we'll all suffer from it. So this is the time when the evolution, we have to go beyond the nation state, we have to go beyond the ego of the nation state to really act as one. We get a problem that can only be solved. Can only be solved. There's no other solution but all human beings coming together and agreeing on it. And that's the pressure it's creating. And it is creating pressure. And the story I told you about the children, there was, I just read an article this morning. A boy, a young man, 18-year-old or something, created a 1-hour YouTube video about how the government in Germany is ruining the environment for the next generation. And within a couple of days, it had 9 million views. One boy, 18, it's talked about as headlines in the country. The Prime Minister doesn't get that coverage in the country that the video got, and now it multiplies all over the world. It is a force for human unity. The waste, it can be solved overnight. Huh?
No more blame game. This country is emitting more.
Unless we have that sincerity and give up the falsehood. If we want to solve the problem, we can do it instantly. We need the pressure because we're unconscious and we enjoy being unconscious. That's all. Very good question. So Dan reads this formula. He doesn't know what it means. He's trying to relate this philosophical statement about life as a conscious force to what happened to him. It doesn't make any sense, but he's asking the question. And the moment you start asking this question, you're on the path to knowledge. You're actually on the path to integral yoga. It may take, ultimately you get there. Because if you sincerely follow this track, ultimately knowledge will reveal to you. How fast? Depends on our sincerity and the intensity of our aspiration. So he's launched on that path. Then he notices NASA comes back and says, okay, we give you the contract, but there's a lot of resistance. They're going to meet a great deal of resistance. Instead of giving you 1-year contract and paying you all the money to do this, we want you to develop a prototype to prove that you can do this. And for that, we're giving you 2 or 3 months and a few $100,000. And they don't have the resources to do that. And it's at that moment they get the life response that a man who used to work with Anya at the Institute in Russia, in Moscow, 3 years ago, when she left her company, she used to work for NASA. She left NASA and came to start MAI. 3 years ago, he quit his institute in Moscow and started a company. And he calls her out of the blue after 3 years and says, I have an IT company now. I was wondering if you have any work for me. And she says, I have work for you. I have big work for you, but I can't pay you until we get paid. He's paying the people. They'll be sitting around. He knows her. He agrees. So instantaneously, when they're faced with a intense difficulty, they get a life response. Why? If they panic, if they despair, if they give up, if they say it's impossible, if they say it's too much risks, there'll be no life response. their determination, their decision that whatever it is, we're going to do it. We'll take responsibility. There must be a way. For a mother's devotee, we say, I will have faith in mother. They don't have mother to have faith in. They don't know who to have faith in. They have to have faith in their aspiration or their determination. We're not going to give up. That decision, whatever it is, we'll find a way. You know the common phrase, where there's a will, there's a way. The will, which is the thing that makes decisions, is a great, great power. It's the greatest power we have. The question is, do we make the decision that pleases our ego or justifies our laziness, or do we make the decision to do the very best thing we can do out of the greatest consciousness and highest values we can do? When we surrender, it's still an act of will. I give up my preferences, I surrender to mother's. It's a great act of will. It's the greatest act we can do, is to surrender our will. That is also an act of will. They do it unconsciously. Only later. They don't know. They see something has happened. Dan begins to scratch his head. What is this life? This life is like a fantasy story. 1 minute we've lost everything. The next minute a solution comes and we get everything. The next minute it's taken away, and 2 minutes later we get what we need. This is happening to us all the time, but we remember it only as long as it's a problem, and then we forget it until the next time. We don't learn from it. The difference is, for Dan, everything that's happening now, he's beginning to wonder and watch. Why does this happen? What does it mean? What does that have to do with this phrase, life is a conscious will, a conscious force? So he's on the path not just to accomplishment, he's on the path to knowledge, which is what Appa wants us all to get. As he's commonly written, when you consecrate and you solve a problem, the great thing is not that you solve the problem, it's that you've discovered the power of consecration. You've discovered that knowledge. And that power is worth far more than any problem we solve. We always forget the consecration at that point and go back to being satisfied. That's the prize, not the thing. So Dan is at the beginning of this quest. Just at that time, Diego calls Simon. Simon comes to Berkeley. Simon goes into the bookstore and actually finds the videotape, the security camera, that films the book falling off the shelf onto Dan's lap. And he's deeply disturbed, and rightfully disturbed, because he sees Dan didn't find the book. The book found Dan. And that really disturbs him. He's understood. He may not understand why. In Synthesis of Yoga, Sri Aurobindo has that phrase, that line, he who chooses the infinite has been chosen by the infinite. You cannot come to God if God hasn't already chosen for you to come. The book, Dan gets the book because it has chosen him as the vehicle. If we have come to Mother, she has chosen us for this, to be offered this. It's for us to rise to the occasion. So without understanding it, Simon has some subtle instinct, this is not good for us. We want the book. The book is avoiding us. By 2 days, it missed Diego, and it's coming to somebody else. He doesn't think about what should I do to get the book to come to me. Of course, he has to completely reverse his consciousness. His consciousness is antithetical. All their efforts to get the book fail. All their very serious efforts of one type or another always miss. Not because of what the outer Dan doesn't know that anybody's after the book. He's not trying to protect himself. The book is protecting itself because Simon's attitude is diametrically opposite. He never knows, he never asks, what is the consciousness which will make the book come to me. Finally, it comes to him when it comes to everybody in the world. He finally gets the book. Then finally gets the book. You can only get it when it comes to everybody, because that's the consciousness of the book. This is a power for everybody. So Dan's trying to understand this. Well, I won't try to go to the, I wanted to go to the end of this book 1 so we could start with book 2, but I won't force it. We are just now, the book has entered their lives. And Dan is trying to understand if life is somehow a conscious force, what does it have to do with our consciousness? We have to understand what our consciousness is. If life is somehow related to us, we don't see a person there, we don't see a consciousness there, do we even understand our own consciousness? And this is critical, because the first thing Dan has to discover is the power of decision. How can a decision have power? Mr. Bennett decides to repay the money, and he gets the marriages, 3 marriages, without paying any money. That's the sincerity of his decision. But how do we explain it to anybody? Dan's a scientist. He's not had the advantage of being born in India. He doesn't have the advantage of having faith in mother. Or what? How can it be? Simply because he... Huh? Okay, yes, sincerity. But how does my sincerity affect what happens outside? We see it. We know it's true. But how does it happen? Dan's a consciousness force. But how? What do we understand about, you see what I'm, do we understand how it happens? I think I've told you this story before. 40-some years ago, we were in our house in Shantinagar at that time, and Appa was talking about the power of decision. And he was talking to me about it. He said, why don't you look it up in the dictionary? And we had this Oxford English Dictionary, which I think has about 8,000 or 10,000 pages, but microprint, so there were 4 pages on each. And I went and picked up the first volume, because there are only 2 volumes in the microprint edition. It's a big, this thick, each volume is this thick. I went back to the chairs, sat down, opened the book without even looking, and when I looked down, there's the word decision. Out of 5,000 pages, out of 50,000 words, at least there are 100,000 words, maybe 200,000 in that dictionary, my eye comes exactly to this word. He says, this is the power of decision. And then I think I've told you this story also. Some 20 years later, when we were in Venkatnagar, one day he said, if you take this decision that he was asking me to take at that time, one of 2 people will call you on the phone, either your partner, Bob, or your client, John, from Montreal. Appa went up to go into the other room for 3 minutes, and when he came back, I was sitting on the phone with John, who had just called from Quebec. How did you know that my taking a decision here can make that man call from there? It looks like pure magic. But if you understand the question, Dan doesn't understand anything now. He doesn't understand that relationship, but he sees there's a relationship. At least the book tells him there's a relationship. We see the relationship, doesn't mean we understand it. In some cases, we get a hint as to what it is. To really understand that relationship one-to-one is the science of life. So when Edmond Dantes is thrown into prison, he doesn't understand why he's thrown into prison. He doesn't understand why he's put in solitary environment, confinement. 4 years he's there. Finally, he gives up hope and decides to starve himself to death. And just a few, he's so weak he can't even move now on the cell floor. Just at that point when his body is ready to die, he hears a scratching sound, and a few minutes later, one of the stones from the floor of his prison cell is lifted, and Abi Faria looks in at him, very disappointed because Faria was trying to escape from the prison and ended up in Edmund's cell instead. Edmund doesn't understand what's happened. His whole future has just come through the floor. All the knowledge and all the wealth of the world and his whole future career and happiness has just come through the floor at the moment he gave up hope. What's the relationship between them? He never knows. That's the knowledge that Dan is going to discover. And that's the knowledge that Appa is asking us to discover in everything that happens to us. Everything that happens to us, there's nothing too small for us to gain a knowledge. It's not the knowledge to blame ourselves for this or that. It's the knowledge to learn this ultimate secret, because it's the conscious force. It's the divine force that's acting in our lives to make us conscious. The more we understand it, the more we can surrender to it, the more we can become receptive to it, the more it can act through us, the more we can accomplish, not just for ourselves, that second, we can accomplish for the world in which we live. So Dan has started the adventure.
Sir, you said every challenge is an opportunity. And opportunity challenge is the perception of the obstacle, overcoming obstacle. When challenge is an opportunity, opportunity replaces action. There are times when we wait for a period in the name of non-reaction, observing the incident, whether it is an obstacle requiring non-reaction or opportunity requiring action. In this period, there are times when we feel the opportunity also goes away. So the question is, what is the period of non-reaction required, or how to determine whether to act or non-react?
Your last point is how to determine whether to act or
non-react.
Non-react. You should never react. That's simple. Whether you act or not. Act is external. What we mean by non-reaction is internal, is psychological. You can never lose an opportunity by not reacting. You can cancel any opportunity by reacting. You don't lose opportunities by non-reacting. You lose opportunities by non-acting, possibly. But there's a difference, no? I don't act out of fear, so I don't act. Appa says don't react. He doesn't say don't act. You see what I mean? When I don't act out of fear, I will definitely lose the opportunity. I'm reacting. Fear is a reaction. Whether I'm angry at somebody or afraid of somebody, or I'm afraid of a risk, it's a reaction. Reaction cancels opportunity. Non-reaction never cancels opportunity. I can tell you, I'm working with in the school in Pandi with Vidya, and she's shown an extraordinary capacity for non-reaction in some of the things that have happened in the school, to the point where I react, and I want her to act, and she's just, and I see those problems just melting away. Where I feel you should have acted, I told you should have acted, because even I'm not the victim. She's the victim. When she reports what's happening, I can't be calm about it. Non-reaction is always positive power. Whether you can go beyond non-reaction, that's consecration. Non-reaction is, I'm so angry, I have to stop being angry, I shouldn't think about it, I'm not going to be angry at anybody, I'm going to be very calm and quiet. It's a great act to overcome the reaction. If you want to make it more, what's more than non-reaction? Instead of going out in reaction, you go in consecration. You shift to faith, you shift to prayer, you shift to consecration, you shift to being cheerful. Cheerfulness is the opposite of reaction. Is it clear? You're waiting. I'm going to answer what I think is the question behind the question is, I lost opportunities because I didn't act. You lose opportunities because you react.
Non-reaction is psychological. That is it.
Definitely.
So it is not related to something on ground. It is
Non-reaction is psychological. There may be circumstances where that the opportunity comes. If you don't react, really don't react, it's a very high state. But there is a positive state to respond to an opportunity. When you overcome the reaction, only then you can really respond to an opportunity. Otherwise, you're still acting out of the ego. When you respond to it, the best thing is to consecrate it, to act cheerfully, to act in faith, to act with inner joy and calm, patiently. You will never lose something doing that. But you're right. It's a very good question because the mind will say, you see, if I don't act, I'm going to lose it. I have to do something. But I'm still reacting. As long as you're reacting, the action will end up in, you have to stop reacting. That's the first thing to do. Then you can think about acting. Very good question.
So thank you, sir, for your excellent interactive presentation. Thanks to all. We are concluding the session. Thank you.